morning, everybody, and welcome to the show this week. And hope you've had a good week, and we'll try and give it a bit of a lift as we go into the weekend. As you know, the show is about life's ups and downs. Everyone has the opportunity to be successful, fulfilled, happy, but not every day or every week or every month. And this show is about the ups and downs as we go. I just have to say, Richie and I are loving doing this. It's a real privilege to be able to interview some amazing people. And frankly, the amazing guests keep coming. So I'm really thrilled to have Sue on the show today. Welcome, Sue.
Hello.
Morning. So fantastic to have you. So Sue is Chief Transformation Officer at MediaCom, which I would say is a pretty key role in the enduring success that MediaCom has had as the biggest media agency in the UK. And that's not just a short-term thing. That's been for literally decades. Now, Sue is probably, or certainly in my view anyway, one of the most highly respected strategic planners in the London advertising world. And also is a published author and is literally just in the process of publishing her second book, Belonging, and we'll come on to that. And that book really continues her long-standing campaigning in the D&I space, probably before D&I as a term was sort of officialised. Sue has been in that space. I've known Sue for many years, and she's got one of the biggest and brightest minds in the world of marketing and advertising. Many plaudits and successes and triumphs and trophies and so on. Just to mention one, last year Sue was included in the FT Heroes list for women who have championed gender equality for the second year in a row, which I think might be relatively unique, but certainly Sue is unique, and it's fantastic to have you here. Perhaps most of all, Sue is also just a lovely person with an interesting story to tell. So I'm really thrilled to have you on the show, Sue.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice. Thank you very much.
So let's get started. Keep the questions coming in. We'll try and feed in as many of those as we possibly can. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Richie to get us started with the first question. Over to you, Richie.
Oh, well, thank you, Mark, and welcome, Sue. It's an absolute privilege to have you with us this morning. Sue, let us kick off. Obviously, the last couple of months have been quite turbulent, to say the least. Mm-hmm. How has it sort of impacted you, both perhaps positively and negatively?
I feel I can't complain, and I feel I shouldn't complain. I mean, I think I came across the term corona coaster of emotions quite, 6 weeks in or something. And I think it's been very, very true. So thankfully, me and my immediate family have stayed well. Obviously, it's been really difficult professionally. And the news, I mean, there was a point towards the beginning of the pandemic when I turned the news on in the morning on the radio, I used to say to the radio, okay, now what? And I'm feeling, I think we're all feeling a bit the same, right? Now what's happened? Because it's dark and it's rainy and the news is not great. But I have been working from home in a very comfortable environment, surrounded by books, as you can see. And work has been busy in a good way. So I think, on balance, there's been ups and there's been downs, but there's an awful lot of people in an awful lot of worse circumstances than I am. I feel fortunate.
Yeah, we should be grateful of our privileges in all regards, I suppose, for many people on this call. I've not heard of Corona Coaster before. I love that one. It reminds me actually. My daughter who's at university and in a Corona fest said that she's had the Rona, so that it's even been abbreviated. It's the Rona, but not to trivialise it, because this is a pandemic. So what do you think might be the enduring impacts on our society beyond the what next? What's the enduring impact?
Well, it's interesting, and you've asked a very big question. Can I bring it back to work? And because obviously I spend a lot of time at work as you do. And I think the way we work is really interesting. So we have a workforce in the UK of over 1,000 people. We switched to working from home. We actually did a practice day on the Friday before the Monday. So we had already moved to working from home as a trial day, and it was extraordinary that nothing went wrong. I mean, it happened really, really well. I would say that efficiency has, if anything, gone up, and possibly effectiveness as well. Now, there are lots and lots of people who want to get back into the office. There are lots and lots of people who don't want to give up the gains that they've had from working from home. So I think the commute is going to change. People traveling on the London, my office is in London, traveling on the London Underground was not fun at the best of times. And there's an awful lot of people now who are wondering why they had to do that every day. And I think that's a good question. I think as far as meetings and video calls are concerned, I have personally worked with more people from around the world in our global network over the last few months than I had done beforehand. And the upside of that, I think, is extraordinary. And I question, Mark, whether we have properly thought about our talent in organisations from a global perspective, even sometimes from a regional perspective. So we are working, I would say, more in concert and better with our regional offices around Britain than we were before we were on video calls. So, just as a small thing, Paul Cooper, who's our brilliant head of MediaCom North, he now comes to every single weekly Exco meeting in as much of physicality as any of the rest of us were, as it were. He's not joining by phone and the rest of us are in the room. So I think that whole thing about working in different ways, I think that's something that's a gain. And then there's the big extrovert introvert question, which you and I, Mark, have talked about a lot, because I am really very introverted. And I don't know if I can't remember if we've talked about the brilliant book by Susan Cain, Quiet, that talks about being an introvert in a world of extroverts. And the business world is built for extroverts. And she talks about the fact that your endorphins as an extrovert get fired by being in a room with other people. And your endorphins as an introvert get fired by sitting quietly and working at your desk. And again, I know you've had Rory on your show. Rory and I have talked about this. This experience of working from home has probably been easier on the introverts than the extroverts, because we aren't missing the energy that extroverts get from being with each other. Now, there's a lot of introverts in the workforce. It's a diversity question. You need a mix of different types of personalities. What we need to work out going forward, and as hopefully things start to return to some sort of normal, is what the new normal is, and reimagine the etiquette of meetings, the etiquette of travel, the how you ensure that you don't. I mean, somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, Sue, video calls are the death of creativity," and I thought, well, all right, but it's not like meetings are actually good for creativity either. Let's not get carried away here. Creativity is a delicate, as you guys know, with the School of Marketing, creativity is a delicate thing. It needs to be nurtured, and I'm not sure that meetings of any kind are particularly necessarily the place to nurture it. So I think all of that is in question. And then look, you're it's actually, I hate to contradict you. This is actually book 3. Because my first book on marketing, Tell the Truth, was 2012, and then The Glass Wall in 2016, and then Belonging out yesterday, very exciting. And I know we're going to talk about it in a bit more. But as we were firmly, as we finished the book, we were firmly in lockdown. So we managed to talk to people and incorporate the issue of working from home and what that does to social capital at work. And I think that's a very big looming question for us going forward. If there is going to be more flexible working, we have relied on our careers, on the social capital that we've created by getting to know people and meeting in person. What happens if going forward there is more flexible working, there's more working from home, there's less everybody in the office together? And what do we do about that? And can we make it so that it's fairer? Because one of the striking things that somebody that I interviewed for the book said to me, a disabled woman who is in a wheelchair, and she said, "Oh, I work from home quite a lot anyway, Sue, and no, I don't feel a great sense of belonging in the workplace. But the reason for that is because I work in an international team, and everybody's not in the office, so we don't run into each other. It's not because I'm disabled." And it's not because I'm working from home. It's because we just have the kind of team that passes in the night. And I think, how do we reset things? That's our big question. How do we reset things so that it's more inclusive anyway?
So you've raised just so many interesting points there, which is fantastic. My reflections on, when you talk about connections and belonging and actually getting through to people, I think the last couple of months has been great, being able to even spark up new sort of friendships and relationships virtually, because people have that little bit more time and ability and desire to connect. And I think perhaps in that sense, it's maybe been a bit easier to get into people's diaries to spark up those relationships. Now, I question the sustainability of those relationships per se, because I do think, what solidifies things is that human sort of interaction and face-to-face contact. But I guess that's a bit of a to be seen. I wanted to change the context slightly, and I love the fact that behind you there, you've got the book All the Places We'll Go. So thank you for championing that. That's very close to our hearts, of course. And I want to kind of take you back to perhaps some of those moments in your career. So can you join some of those dots for us as to how you were able to get to where you are, and perhaps some of those transition moments that you had?
Well, I started out as a TV time buyer at a full service agency in the 1980s called Benton and Bowles. And I stumbled into advertising and media. I had absolutely no idea what media is. I don't think anybody that joined a media department at that time really knew what media was. And I have still to explain to many of my relatives what it is that I actually do. I've ever tried to explain what a media agency does to people that aren't in the trade. It seems quite esoteric. I'd done history at university, and I was heading off to do law, a law conversion course, and I got absolutely fed up of being skint. So I decided to just get a job, and I applied for maybe 6 jobs. I probably applied for loads and loads and loads. I had maybe 6 interviews. I got 2 job offers, and out of the 2 job offers I got, one of them was to be a grad fast stream assistant to Charles Fenwick, which I actually think would have been quite interesting. But it meant that I had to spend 2 months working in Fenwick's in Windsor. And in my head at that age, I was sort of, no, I've done shop work. I've been to university now. I want to do something else. So I didn't want to do that. I think it could have been quite interesting. And the other job was, as I say, a TV time buyer. So off I went to do that. What happened was that the agency that I worked for got acquired by Darcy McManus Macias and became DMB&B. And quite extraordinarily, the whole of the media department walked out because the guy that ran the department didn't like the fact that he hadn't been consulted about the acquisition in the UK. It was a big American deal. And he walked out and he set up and one of the early media independents, Ray Morgan & Partners, but he didn't take me. So out of a department of 40 people, 3 of us were left to go over to the merged company, which is a whole story in itself. So, I know very much this podcast is about where we stumble, as Joseph Campbell would say, where you stumble, there you can find treasure. And this was an example of that. So I got left behind for reasons that I probably could speculate about, but and it wasn't great because a lot of the business, they were losing a lot of the media business to this startup, which eventually became Zenith, obviously a famous agency now. And there were dark days, dark days in St James's Square, and I think it was about to get made redundant out of the TV buying department because so much of the business had been lost to Ray Morgan & Partners. And then the head of planning, a guy called Mike O'Sullivan, said he was looking for somebody. And he basically said, well, she seems bright. I'll give Sue a go. So I moved from buying into planning, which meant that I moved from trading, which, I could do, but I wasn't passionate about, to media planning, which was an emerging discipline at that time. And of course, media planning is all about people and all about motivations. And the more curious you are about why people do things, the better you are at it. And when I moved into planning, suddenly everything made sense. It's kind of what I'd been doing until then was what I'd been told, and I think I wasn't bad at it. But when I moved into planning, it was kind of, okay, wow, this is really interesting. Who should we really be aiming these ads at? And how can we really place them in a place, or what else can we do in terms of really convincing the audience to stop doing this and start doing this, or stop buying that and stop buying it? And it really, my career went on from there. So I spent a couple of years at DMB&B, moved to another full service agency where I had basically, I suppose you might, well, I had an unfortunate disagreement in terms of, I'd say, ethics probably. So I left quickly, and this little buying shop called the Media Business offered me a job. And when I joined the Media Business, we were barely in the top 10 of media agencies. This was in 1990, so a long, long time ago. We billed 44 million. And Steve Allen, who until very recently, till this year, was my global CEO. Steve Allen at that time was the new business director. And I arrived, and everywhere I'd worked before, they'd had somebody average running new business, because it's quite a difficult thing to do, and people hadn't put their hand up for it. When I went to work at the Media Business, I was astonished to find that the very best person in the company was running new business, which, what a good idea that is, right? If you're a company that wants to grow. And we set out to win new business together, set up strategy within Media Independent for the first time, really. And that company now bills over 1.5 billion in the UK, and is obviously a global company. And I've been there for 30 years this year. There are the over 20 years club is surprisingly huge. And I think, again, that speaks to a sense of belonging and being part of a team. And the great thing about it, and the great thing about that culture, is that I'd say, people join and they feel part of it. Some people join and they never feel part of it, in which case they don't stay. But the people who join, that kind of sense of being a MediaCommer the spirit is very strong. And I'm very proud to have been part of a team of people that include all sorts of people, including the wonderful and lovely and glamorous Claudine Collins, who I've worked with for more than 20 years, who you've had on this show. And we're very proud of what we've built together.
It's an amazing story for MediaCom, but also your career path.
Yeah.
I do want to come on to talk about diversity in your book and leadership, but just before we do, to go back even further, what are your earliest memories, Sue, and maybe how would you characterise yourself as a child? And what I'm really trying to scratch at is, where does that eternal curiosity really come from?
There's two things. There's two stories that I will tell you from my childhood, because I've thought about this recently. And I've thought about what I really deep down care about. And I care about fairness, and I care about people fulfilling their potential. And these are not sob stories about my childhood. You have a huge range of people on your program, but they're pivotal points, a couple of pivotal points for me. One of them, which I suppose relates to fairness, but I mean, from an adult point of view, you might not even think it's unfair. But I can remember, I'm by far the youngest child in my family, and you and I have talked about places in family, and Mark, and the impact that has, and how much it changes, who you are. So my brother was 9 years older than me. My sister is 11 years older than me, and my brother actually most of the time was sent away to school. But I can remember very clearly at the age of 4, we used to have families kind of dinners every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, grown-up dinner in the dining room. And I can remember very clearly at the age of 4 having a discussion with my dad and my sister, so my sister would have been 15, and being absolutely furious that my opinion wasn't taken seriously. I mean, absolutely livid and completely baffled by why that should be. Now, I think that's that's had a lasting impact on me, that kind of experience. It means, I think, first of all, the thing is that I'm not good. I don't really understand status. So, I mean, and you'll know this of me, Mark, because you've seen me ask questions in meetings that perhaps sometimes I shouldn't always have asked. I didn't, just as I didn't get that my sister was a sort of a grown up and I was a child, I don't really get, I always think, you know, express your opinion in a meeting, and I urge everyone, you know, I think deference can get taken too far. Respect, I believe in, but deference to age, title, you know, you've got a point of view. Doesn't matter who you are, how young you are, you know, you should be allowed to express it. So I think that had a kind of pivotal moment for me. And then the other one, which is about technique. So I think a lot of people write themselves off because of what they hear, or they get written off because they haven't understood a specific technique. So when I was at school, in my first 2 years of senior school, so I'm what, how old are you then, 12, 13? If you got 3 A's in a row or 6 A minuses in a row, then you got a good work mark. And if you got a good work mark, then you got your name read out in school assembly at the end of half term and at the end of term. And I was a real B plus student in those days. And my best friend, who I sat next to, every week she'd say to me, "Oh, I'm just going to get my good work marks written up in the headmistress's office. Are you coming, Sue?" And I'd go, "I haven't got any this week again." But every half term at the end of school assembly, I would hope, I can really remember this really strongly, I would hope that they would read my name out by mistake. I just used to sit there through the whole assembly thinking maybe they'll say my name by accident. Obviously they didn't. Anyway, me and my best friend then fell out, and I became friends with another girl, with Susan Leon. And Viv and I got back together as friends, but I became friends with Susan Leon. And she said to me, "Oh, the thing about your work, Sue, is that it's messy. You know, that's if you tidy it up, you'll lift it from a B plus to an A minus." This might seem really obvious to everybody that's out there listening, but I didn't understand that if you used a ruler to underline your headline in red, then that was better than just underlining your headline in pencil without a ruler. Really simple technique. I mean, basically the use of the ruler. It's technology, right? It's very, very early technology. Anyway, so she helped me with that, and I lifted my grades. And I also, hearing my name in school assembly, I think made me angry as well. I mean, it could have made me go two ways, couldn't it? It could have made me think, "Oh, I can't bother with this," but actually it made me angry. And so I applied myself, and I did well in what were then for me O levels. And then after that, I was the only girl in my year to get into Oxford in the 4th term with an unconditional offer, which you could get in those days. And at that point, they did read my name out in school assembly. But as you know, I prefer to pronounce my name Unerman, Sue Unerman. And very few people that don't know me know how I pronounce my surname. And so when they did read my name out in school assembly, they said, "And anyway, we'd like to congratulate Susan Unerman on getting into..." And I thought, "Oh, they haven't even read my name. All these years, I've been waiting for this moment." But the point I think about that was that it drove me. I mean, it drove me in the sense of, you know, I can't bear it. I actually can't bear it when people get picked for fast streams, or picked, you know, as you're the chosen person for this, because there's an awful lot of people that maybe could have been in those teams, but they just lack a bit of technique, and that could be for all kinds of reasons.
So, I think this whole thought process around technique and understanding how sort of the game almost works to move from from a B to an A minus. I think it's actually quite telling and very insightful about how people can approach different problems and solutions at work to kind of get ahead. And the two things that really struck to me about what you've said is, one, having that desire, and that desire stems from some pretty embryonic things. And then the second part is actually doing small things each day to kind of move towards that. And it's almost sort of, what the mantra that we talk about in marketing about sort of, trial and error, test and learn sort of scenarios sort of plays out all throughout people's lives, in a much wider context than marketing. So let's turn the conversation a little bit as to what Mark was talking about in terms of the D&I sort of conversation. And I know you're a massive advocate of sort of gender issues. And of course, you've written a book, The Glass Wall, just around some of those differences that we're seeing. We've got a question here from Nigel. So Nigel Ashton. So thanks for the question there, Nigel. He asks, so what other differences do you think we need to be aware of as we all learn to adapt to the ongoing work from home culture, in specific relation to some of the gender differences that you talk about in your book?
So working from home experience was you might have guessed that there would be a gendered aspect to it, and that we now know factually that there's a gendered aspect to it. So research studies have shown that for every extra hour that a dad spends on childcare and housework, a mum spends 3, and that there are fewer papers, for example, being published by women economists than by men economists. And I think I had an inkling of this myself, because what tended to happen with video calls was that women would be perched on a bed, men would have a table. That if a mum got interrupted by a child, she would be very apologetic about it, whereas a dad would tend to think it was cute. And so there does seem to be a difference in how it's playing out between men and women. And I think there's something about, I don't know a single woman, and it's not just about mums, it's if you're in a partnership or you're caring, it could be a puppy or it could be a parents, elderly parents or anything. There's no woman that I've spoken to that doesn't feel that during the last few months they have partly taken on the role of a 1950s housewife, and I don't know whether that's simply because it's that mental load issue, which is that, yes, I know that I could ask so and so to do the hoovering or whatever, but by the time I get around to asking him and he actually does it, I might as well have just done it myself. And so that's absolutely the situation that's going on. And I think it's important for us to take that into account as we create these new rules for the workplace for the rest of the time of the pandemic, but also when we reinvent and reimagine as we come out, hopefully next year. And I think, yeah.
I just want to just interject there for a second, because I'd like just to, I guess, get your advice and guidance on what some of those new rules could look like to help the situation. I mean, it's a really critical piece. So what kind of things do you think we should be thinking about here?
So one of the things that's come up really strongly is that one of the benefits of working from home for mums is that they can have meal times with their kids in a way that they couldn't before. So breakfast and tea and supper, and also be around for bedtime. I think the hours that people work, we need to be really respectful of. So we used to have a rule at MediaCom in the UK that there were no emails before 7 in the morning and no emails after 7 at night. But as one working mother said the other day, okay, well, I need to stop work at 4 and pick it up again at 8. So that really doesn't work for me at the moment. But equally, I don't want my team to think that if I send them an email at 9 o'clock at night, that they've got to answer it at 9 o'clock at night. But if you get an email from your boss at 9 o'clock at night, even if it says in the email listing, you don't need to look at this until tomorrow morning. That doesn't mean that it's not on your mind. So I think we need to work out what we do about that. And of course, with Microsoft, you can set a send later timer to it. Most people that I know don't know about that, don't use that technique. I think there are issues about what people feel in terms of neurodiversity and their requirements for meetings that we don't ask about at the moment. Often we just assume everyone's going to show up and manage. And I think that the same could be true about what's going on with workload. So as Mark's maybe talked about, we have in MediaCom, we're running an agile pilot at the moment. And the great thing about agile ways of working is that you have very frequent check-ins with your team about what's going on. And one of the huge benefits that we found in our agile pilot is what's twofold. First of all, one of the people that's in the pilot has said at a time when he's physically apart from his colleagues, he's never felt closer to them because he's checking in with them every day. And that's not gendered. But the other aspect of it is that if you do suddenly find that you can't get something done because of some sort of family crisis that you're, mainly taking responsibility for, it's much easier to hand that off to a colleague. And the great thing about Agile, the thing I love about it, is it lets you delegate upwards as well as downwards as well as sideways. So I think that Agile ways of working is helping us, and I think it can probably help more people.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's prompted a brilliant answer. So if I go back even further, you've already talked a little bit, but I want to understand sort of what's the origin of D&I for you. You've talked already about fairness and inclusivity as a 4-year-old versus a 15-year-old sibling. But when did that sort of crystallize into something sort of hard-edged and official in your mind, and then led you to write a book about it and a second book about it? So that sort of journey of D&I in your mind.
So when I joined the media business in 1990, I was the most senior woman they'd ever employed. And I was like, mid-management. And when they put me on the board, it was the first time that board had seen a woman in there apart from making the tea. When I wrote The Glass Wall, Karen Blackett was CEO of our UK office at a time of huge growth. And her exco, so that her most senior team, out of 5 client-facing people, 4 of us were women and 3 out of the 4 of us work part-time. And I think, had you said to anybody, oh, well, that's what we're going to do, we're going to have 4 out of the 5 will be women, 3 out of the 4 will work part-time. It's a very highly competitive organisation. It's 24/7, as you know. I mean, if we've said your launch spot is going out on Saturday night in the middle of Britain's Got Talent and it doesn't go out, you do not wait politely till 9:30 on Monday morning to tell us about it. It really is 24/7. It's Christmas Day, Boxing Day, day and night. But it worked. And actually writing the book, The Glass Wall, was not my idea. It was my CEO, my global CEO, Nick Lawson, who I've worked with for 29 years. It was his idea. Because I'd written a book in 2012 called Tell the Truth, Honesty is Your Most Powerful Marketing Tool. And I went to him a couple of years later and I said, I think I'd like to write a follow-up to the book. Would MediaCom publish it? Because I want to make it about our lovely clients, not about, things in general. And a publisher wouldn't do that. And Nick went, yeah, he said, we'll do that. He said, Sue. And then he said, very surprisingly, he said, but that's not the book you should write. He said, I've been thinking about a book you should write, and you should write a book about women at work. And at first, I thought it was a terrible idea, partly because Sheryl Sandberg had just published Lean In. And I think Lean In is a great book, but it's a book for extroverts. It's a book for powerful people. And if I'd read Lean In when I was 25, I think I would have gone back to bed. It just was, it can be quite intimidating. And I wanted to do something for everybody that's struggling. But the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about the situation at MediaCom, and we hadn't promoted Karen to be CEO because she was a woman, or because she's a black woman, or because she's a single mother, which she also is. We promoted her because she was really, really good at what she did, and you'd sort of be an idiot not to promote her. And I thought, well, statistically, and we did start with gender, 51% of the population, not just recently, but always, why is it that if you look at the statistics, FTSE 100 statistics, CEOs on the FTSE 100, government statistics, how many women prime ministers there's ever been, or, law firms, business, there's so few women that have risen to the top. It can't be because of the lack of talent. It's statistically not possible, in which case there are other reasons. And so I set out with my friend Catherine Jacob to explore what those reasons were, and to try and write something that gave advice about how to get through those problems. And the idea of the glass wall, and it was a glass wall rather than a glass ceiling, because glass ceiling implies it's when you're at the top of your career. And actually the glass wall you can walk into the glass wall at work from the day you enter a new organization, or even if you suddenly get a new boss who's different from your old boss. And it's almost an invisible barrier of understanding and expectation, and a set of rules that men seem to understand better than women, almost innately. And I can give you some examples of that. Things like self-promotion. So I know a lot of women, and I'm sure you do as well, who work really hard, are very good at what they do, would do anything for the organization that they work for, bar one thing, and that's talk about how good they are. And one of the stories that stayed with me a lot from the book was actually about a woman who just said, look, I've just realized that if my boss passes me in the corridor, and this is someone who worked as a consultant in the NHS, she said, we're really, really busy, and it's actually life and death. I mean, we like to think it's life and death in advertising, but, hospitals actually life and death. So if my boss passes me in the corridor, he says, how are things going? I don't want to just to interrupt him. I just go, it's fine. And she said, I realised that when he passes, a man who's the equivalent of me and says, how are things going? He's much more likely to say, oh, it's huge. It was a huge problem, but I solved it. Don't worry about a thing. In the space of those same 2 minutes, who's lined themselves up for the next promotion? What we realised 4 years on from the glass wall is that gendered view that we'd had of the workplace, it's actually not about men in general. It's about a very few, a small amount of men. That the workplace, the rules of the workplace are designed for a kind of alpha, patriarchal, workaholic type man who's got a full-time stay-at-home partner. And they don't work for huge numbers of people of talent. And that's why we've published the book Belonging, because what we want to do is we want to give lots and lots of case studies and shared experiences and work arounds and work throughs, because when we get enough of the breed of belonging champions that we hope to create out there, then the culture of the workplace will change.
Yeah, we just had a comment actually from Jordan, who's the brains behind a lot of this, and he said, I never looked at it like that. But those 4 things you mentioned, in terms of the way the workplace is wired, they're so incredibly resonant. I'm just going to come in because there's a question from Olivia here, and then we do need to find out a bit more about belonging. But he basically did open herself up and made a proposal to a CEO, renowned for, in the end was fired, and it knocked her confidence. So how do you get over the fact that some people will not be receptive of someone who shares their ideas and questions authority, even in a polite and respectful way?
I think, look, I've had that experience as well. I can absolutely assure you. One of the reasons that I've stayed so long at MediaCom is because of the growth of the company. One of the other reasons is that it's allowed me to be myself. So what I would say to you is this is quite difficult. Sometimes you need to work around the person that you're pitching to, and garner support rather than confront, rather than surprise. Garner support from allies before you take a proposal to the top person. That's the first thing to say, is that there's ways around that. The other thing is that I definitely wouldn't have had the career that I've had if I hadn't have worked for somebody whose biggest bit of advice to me, Steve's main bit of advice to me during my career was, do you know what, Sue? Just be yourself. Not every organisation wants you to be yourself. If that's not what your organisation allows, sometimes you need to take a deep breath and go, okay, am I in the right place?
It's really great advice, and I think that's certainly resonates. Sue, I love to hear a little bit more about the new book, Belonging. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, as I said, it came out of the fact that we had been giving lots and lots of talks. We've been over 200 talks for the Glass Wall, including at Direct Line Group, actually. You very kindly hosted us. And what was starting to happen with the talks was that they would mainly be women, of course. And at one point during the Q&A, one of the women would put her hand up and go, can I just ask a question? Not of Sue and Catherine, but of the organisers. Why aren't there any men here? And there'd be maybe one or two men there, and the men would go, well, I don't think we thought it was for us. We didn't want to hog the, seats or whatever. And then the woman would say, how is the conversation going to change if there's only women in the room? So we wanted to think about this and write a book about why it is that I think $8 billion that is spent on D&I annually, and has been since the Glass Wall was published, does not seem to have had particularly impressive outcomes. And we think that the reason for that, from our research and from the surveys that we've done and the interviews and the talks, is that there are many aspects of current D&I initiatives that feel quite excluding to the very people who are currently in power often, so straight white men very often. And I can guarantee you that if they're not included in the conversation, then things are not going to change. So what we wanted to do was explore how you move from diversity and inclusion actually to a sense of belonging. Because if you have a sense of belonging about the company, you don't expect someone else to solve it, any problems. You take on solving it yourself. And only if everybody in the organisation, not just the boss, not just the head of HR, not just, some people who've just joined, but everybody in the company takes responsibility for the fact that everybody should feel like they belong, then you get a change.
Yeah. Usually resident, we, like many companies, are going through that process. We've had our first D&I survey results, and they could be a lot better. And that word around the word belonging, I think, is diversity and inclusion 2.0. So great that you're owning that space, and I hope the book is a tremendous success. So we're out of time. I don't know where it went. It's got in a flash. You've been brilliant, and I can't thank you enough for your insights and really challenging our thinking, actually. Hopefully, and you'll see some of the comments, people have been challenging their thinking, which is great. I know is what drives you. So thank you. It's been wonderful to have you on the show. And Richie will also want to say thank you as well. Just before we go, thanks everyone for tuning in. Next week, just to tee up, we've got Ben Kay, who was an England rugby player who went on to co-found an advertising agency. So quite an interesting career story. So you'll get 2 for 1, a bit about what it takes to be an elite sports person, but also that startup journey as well. But for now, thanks again, Sue. Over to you, Richie, and great weekends all.
Sue, I can only iterate what Mark is saying. You've opened my eyes to a variety of different issues that I hadn't fully been cognizant of or conscious of. And I think for everybody watching the show this morning would have got something from that, where we'll be able to change our little actions in little ways to actually make a difference in our world. So thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me, and great show. What a great show. What a great start to my Friday.